They didn't know why we were even asking. I had sent invitations out to the IETF liaisons list, and some of the feedback I got was, wait, why? This is not the kind of information we share with our points of contact, and they didn't. No one came to any of the calls, and there were other groups that I tried to reach out to. What we ended up hearing was that it would be more powerful to say, okay, you don't have to sit there and make sausage with us, but could you at least join us at breakfast and see how that goes. Okay, the third and final of these meetings had 6 people. We had this great step function as we went through. And this group also said that IAB involvement is critical for all sorts of reasons. This is where there was a suggestion to bring in past IAB and IETF chairs as core membership because they presumably would have a longer term vision. Now, part of what made that funny is the person who suggested it at the time also said, that would be me, but I don't want to do that. So, but the idea was out there. They really wanted the group to look to the long-term structure of the RFC editor. This is not about short-term tactical things. This is we need to come up with a model that will actually survive for more than 2 or 3 years. We're looking at more like 8, 10, 12, we'll see. Some of the long-term structural issues that they felt this group really need to clearly focus on, this group being, whatever program or working group is put together, would be things like business issues, where funding should come from, administration, who and how hiring and firing should be handled, and editorial control. How does that work? Who gets to say no to publishing something and under what circumstances? It was fairly clear that one of the things that the IETF community is really good at is developing heroes. People, you get these individuals, and the roles are built around the individual and what the individual can do because the individual is really good at that. But then if that individual changes, people want the role to change because they're not sure they're going to trust the next person as much as they trusted the original entity. That makes it really hard to actually define a role. And if you put something out for contract, you can't say, well, here's what the contract is, and we'll add more later if we decide we trust you. Trust me, that does not work well. So there were our meetings. Here's basically the summary. We've got consistent open participation as a fundamental necessity. Something that looks like a working group, including the potential for an initial design team. Did I mention the open participation and making sure this is as transparent as possible? That was a pretty common theme throughout. And focus more on the long term than the short term. So the proposal, and this was put together in an internet draft. How many of you have read the internet draft? I love you guys. You're awesome. Thank you. Was that this, the proposal is that this in fact become an IAB program with open membership, strong support for remote participation, and a group that would produce regular meeting minutes and community updates in whatever form makes the most sense. The scope of work would include, just determining what is the full scope of responsibilities within the RFC editor, in particular those for the RFC series editor, to consider and propose business and administration requirements, funding, management, that kind of thing, and also to actively solicit input from organizations that are going to be impacted by changes in the series, whether or not they want to actually have anything to do with guiding that one way or the other. They're still going to have to consume what comes out of it, and therefore they do have a certain stake in the game. There's been some discussion on the RFC interest list about the draft, and also on my advisory group, which is a very unofficial group of folks that I use as a brain trust periodically. But I suspect there are things that could be improved in that draft. There are things that could be improved in the proposal of how to run this. And that's what I was hoping we would discuss today. We already have a Jabber scribe. Thank you, Adrian. And we have a note taker. Thank you, Sarah. When you come to the mic, if you would say your name slowly and clearly, I would appreciate it, as would Sarah. And for the folks who are on Meet Echo, I apologize for not being a working group chair. I will do my best.
This is Adrian. On that Meet Echo point, since you weren't in the Jabber room while you were talking, Meet Echo's only just come up. So the remote people have missed, apart from your slides, they've missed hearing your wonderful voice. But hopefully
I'm not doing all that again. That was, wait a minute. I need to see who's on Meet Echo. If the Meet Echo folks do have like specific questions about stuff, let me know. I guess the one thing I would reemphasize is that we're focused very much on talking about the process of making decisions. We're not talking about the decisions themselves and the different possibilities for how the RFC editor model could go. That's out of scope for today. Okay, and with that, I will open for discussion.
Hi, I'm Bob Hinden. One comment. So, I mean, we have an RFC that describes the RFC editor model. So is the output what you're proposing, a revision of that?
I would expect that would be part of the scope, yes.
Okay.
If the group decides it necessary. I mean, it would be also perfectly reasonable to say the RFC editor model 2 still should make sense. It just wasn't implemented well. If that's what the group decides, that's also perfectly reasonable.
Well, I mean, I was involved in the BIS that is now in the RFC editor for the LLC changes, and I think there were some issues. There's some things in the document that clearly don't match current reality. So I don't know if this is the right. So
I think this would be a good place to put that work, yes.
There we go.
Okay.
Ted Hardy speaking. I just wanted to reaffirm, based on the discussions the IAB had earlier this summer, that we're clearly happy to do whatever the community wants here, including spin up a program according to the lights that the draft suggests.
Thank you, Ted.
Hello, Heather. Brian Carpenter. I keep annoying Ted with this, but I think I want to say it here because it's my fault that the IEB charter doesn't actually describe what the IEB does in respect of the RFC editor, because it has some very specific wording in, which possibly was originally written by Christian, actually, in the previous version of the charter, saying that what the IEB does is approve the appointment of an organization to act as RFC editor and its general policy, or words to that effect. I think reality is, for the last 10 years at least, the IEB has done more than that. And I think one outcome of this process should be that the IEB takes it upon itself to propose an update to its own charter to make sure that the charter actually describes reality, or we adjust reality to match the charter. But the discrepancy shouldn't survive. I'd also make a request to the IEB that it will be very helpful as this process goes forward if the IEB itself affirms the independent editorial status of the RFC editor, because to me that was always obvious and we didn't write it down, and we should have done.
No, it's okay. I'll go. I just wanted to know if I needed to go to the other line. Right.
6 of one, half and another.
No, please.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a general, in preparation for this meeting, I not only reread the RFC editor and I asked it 2.0, and I read your document. So this is a reflection on both, since you're proposing since Bob was talking very generally about a revision of that document, there seems to be some place in all of this for a respect of trust that seems to be missing in the documents. In modern, oh, you're getting coffee. That's a very important thing to listen with. Tell me when you're ready. Okay, good. There have been numerous books written about the speed of trust and a respect for professionalism and the startup model and I find this lacking. So when you talk about, this is just feedback, when you talk about orchestrating such and such, it appears like you're treating the RFC editor like a bureaucracy point when by the structure presented in both documents, the person is a highly skilled professional and should be treated as such. So all of this discussion, I know it's about process, but the thing I find missing in the process is the place for the respect of the professionalism that we have. I mean, all of us are here are professionals. Most of us have advanced degrees. A person who comes with library science is an equal professional with equal standards. The feedback is I don't see that in this, and I find that a missing piece because in a contract, it's under at-will employment. At-will employment says we're both working together for a professional goal. If we both think it's not working, we discontinue because it's not working. And no harm, no foul. We're going to go home and play in our corners by ourselves. That's not here at all in this in these documents or in this stream or in this discussion. And I find that problematic since that is the essence of what makes startups go fast. And I think we want to go fast with our publications and with our work.
Thank you. Ted.
Ted Hardy, I wanted to go back to the process issue that Brian raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was supposed to give my name, Sue Harris.
Brian was requesting that an output of this process be that the IAB adjust its charter to match the reality that resulted from the end of the process. And while I think that's a valid outcome, it can't be through an IAB program because the BCP, because the IAB charter is a BCP, it's an IETF output and it needs an IETF process to approve it. However, one possibility here might be that the result of the IAB program could be a proposal that could go to the recently minted Gen dispatch process for figuring out how it became an actual BCP. But just, I think it's quite important to note that the IAB doesn't update its own charter. It doesn't have that right or power.
Thank you. Leslie?
Leslie Daigle, and I'm not sure that I agree with what Ted just said, but I would have to go digging. I stood up here because I wanted to talk a little bit about, in talking about the process, the how, I think we also need to make sure we're clear on the what. What you were articulating a moment ago included, talking about how do we fund the RFC editor, how do we do this, how do we do that, and I'm very concerned that we start a process that looks like, say, hey, let's define a document publication system. Let's do it all from, tabula rasa, which I don't think is the ask. So maybe part of the how is to first articulate what are the top order problems that we think we have to solve and stay focused on those.
Thank you. Ecker?
Yeah. So Eric Squirrela, this overall plan seems generally sound. I think I would, there's a bit in the document about how that we should IETF chairs might be good candidates for hosting this. I think probably that's not a good plan.
We pulled that out.
Good, excellent. I guess I'm restraining myself, and I would guess I'd ask others to restrain themselves. We probably don't have to have the discussion about the substantive outcomes right here. I'm sure we all have thoughts about them, but I think Leslie's point about what's the scope is relevant. I think certainly we should be taking as read that money from this comes from the LLC and like that sort of stuff. But I think, from my perspective, that we should be assuming that, but that the overall question is like what best serves the needs of the community going forward into the next, as you say, 10 or whatever years.
Thank you.
Hi.
Mike?
Mike St. John's. I've got three things. Let me hit Eckers first. One of the problems we're having is who gets to call consensus. The reason for suggesting the chairs was a past, a level of expertise with respect to the IETF and the community, and some measure of trust, if you will. So that was the a set of people that might have made sense for that. So I don't know if that's where we're going to go, but at some point in time, somebody's going to have to decide what the consensus is, and we got to figure out to do that in a way that's neutral between the sides that are currently lining up here. With respect to the output of this thing, I think we're looking for eventually a BCP as the output of this process, which means it will be a community consensus, not an IAB consensus on the IAB program that we're standing up. Okay, people may disagree with that, but I think if that's where we're going, that's what we should be looking at. And the third thing I think is the IAB ought to think about what it wants its role to be in this thing and actually come forward with a consensus document from themselves about what they think their role should be going forward. So.
Okay, thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, Suzanne Wolf. I think I'm slightly to my surprise, I'm about to reinforce what Mike just said. The critical point here might well be who calls consensus, or what do we do to guarantee the process terminates if consensus turns out to be as difficult as it looks like it might be. Because we did all of this not so very long ago. I mean, I feel old saying that, but it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And we did have, as I recall, a fairly hard-fought plan to basically reuse existing process in a way that meant that we were in a situation then where the process of figuring out this model had to terminate. Decisions had to be made in order for the function to continue to be performed. We're in roughly that situation now, which means we do need a forcing function because we can't let this drag on indefinitely, and sort of putting on those kind of constraints and figuring out how to reuse existing legitimate process to make sure that this process terminates seems like a really important first order priority.
Thank you. Leslie?
Leslie Daigle again, just following up my side remark about Ted's comment on updating RFC 2850, and not to grind down on a detail, but because I think it's an important point about what the IAB should feel it can and cannot do. So RFC 2850 as a BCP is indeed subject to ISG approval. It is, as Mike St. John's articulated, a question of getting community consensus on any changes. But speaking as somebody who used to sit in the IAB chair role and went through many years of, feeling the what can we do, what can't we do, if it comes to updating the IAB charter, first order priority is to do the right thing and make it read the right way. And if the IAB has to, have a glaring match with the ISG over, approve this or not, that's the job. Anyway, my point being really that it's in some of what Ted said, and I'll be glad to have him clarify so that I don't walk out of the room feeling this way. It sounded a little bit like, well, we'd like to do that, but we're not sure we can, or whatever. The IB is not subject to the IASG.
Okay. Since I think this is a direct response, why don't you go ahead?
Ted Hardy speaking. So I think that the point I was making is a process point. We're here to discuss the process. And Brian's point was that he wanted to see a change to the IAB charter to reflect the reality that comes out of this community process. And I'm happy to agree with him that that's a valuable output. But I think I wanted to make the point that once it has come out of this process, that output then has to go through the IETF process because it's updating a BCP. Now, if you want to put that as IESG approval of it, sure. I think it's more important that the community as a whole approves of it. And so it has to go through the IETF last call process and the other processes. Gen Dispatch has been created for mechanisms like that, where some other thing has been created externally that's more or less ready for IETF discussion. And that's the point I was making. I continue to think, however, that if the folks in this room agree with Mike St. John, that the output of this is a BCP and that therefore it's something that reflects that sort of consensus, then running an IETF working group like process in the IEB and then bringing it over to the IETF to create a BCP is an extra step. You could simply run the IETF working group like process in the IETF. Because you're still going to have the ISG come to consensus on the output in order for it to become a BCP. So I think there's a real question there of whether you want the process that runs to be just IETF-like or an IETF process. Okay. If what you're doing is updating the current documents the way Bob Hinden put them, then an IEB process that runs with open participation and a selected chair from the community is perfectly fine at doing that, because those are IEB documents and the IEB can update those without then going to get the ISG's approval. But if what you eventually want is the ISG's approval, then the simplest way to do that is to run the process the ISG manages.
Okay. Well, we'll have one more on this topic, but then I want to get to the rest of the line.
I think Ted misunderstood me or was conflating a couple of different things. I'm suggesting that the output of this thing is a BCP, which means it's community consensus. I'm suggesting that the IAB separately look at its role and provide input into the BCP, and then as its own action, figure out what it needs to do about its charter. Okay.
Aaron?
Aaron Falk. Full disclosure, I served as part of the RFC editor at one time, currently a member of the RFC series advisory group. Two comments, and I have to say my thoughts are still kind of forming on this, but one, when we talk about sort of creating this activity, and it is without sort of talking in any detail about the what, it's a blank box. I feel like it would be important as an early output would be sort of a statement of principles, right? I think that one of the things I think that's defined the RFC series advisory group has been a sense of stewardship. There's a lot of history here. There's a real attempt to have continuity in how our documents are handled, and I think that that's the kind of thing that there should be some sort of guideposts for whatever the output of this activity comes, that it is, you know, the things that the group believes it supports as principles. That would make me feel a lot better as a participant or just an observer of that activity. And the other thing is kind of a nit, but it really got to me that in one of the calls, the third call, I think the summary said, the group should come up with a process for the long term, 6 to 8 years, for a 50-year document series. And then somebody else, maybe it was Ted, said, or maybe it was Ecker, said 10 years. I think that we should believe that whatever we come up with can survive at least 10 years, preferably longer. But I think 6 to 8 years is too short. I'll just leave it at that.
Harald?
Harald Alvestrom. I'm thinking of an Einstein quote, or attribute to Einstein, which is saying that you cannot solve problems by the same means that you used to create them. Thank you. So, in this particular context, I am worried that we have a discussion of substance, of getting to the right decision, and we have a decision of formalities, which is getting the result of that decision through the process to be published, and we're mixing them. The basis for this whole shenanigan was that our recent escapades, starting with RFC++ and some, well, before and after that, have shown that there's a disconnect between leadership and community in what we should do. Therefore, a process that needs to come up with the right solutions needs to be outside of the current established procedures. An IETF working group with chairs approved by the ISG is not appropriate. However, when that process, whatever it is, concludes, we will run the standard process of the IETF to have the resulting documents stamped with whatever stamps they need to have. And if at that point someone wishes to refight the battles, I'm sure that the recent discussion about recall positions will become significant again. I hope we'll not get there, because I believe sincerely that this community has a strong will to get to do the right thing, no matter what our differences of opinion have been in the past.
Brian?
Hi, Brian Trammell, outgoing IAB. First, thank you very much for running this process and this document. I think the principles of the process that are laid out here are perfectly reasonable and sane, and like everything here is just a tweak to that. I want to reiterate what Aaron said. I think it is very good guidance to say we should split the principles from the process discussion first here and then in this program, because I've seen through this entire thing we get really tied up on the details of the process, and we can lose track of what it is we're actually trying to do. So I think we should come to agreement on what it is we're trying to do, and then let's argue the points of process. Having said that, I'm going to nitpick the process here a little bit.
You're such an engineer.
So this, I'm a manager now, actually, so I will take that as a compliment. This document is essentially a recommendation to the IAB that it should create a program. I've noticed through this entire discussion that there is less trust of goodwill on all sides than I have seen in many other discussions in the IETF space. So a mere recommendation to the IAB that it create a program which the IAB can create and destroy programs at will may or may not be enough for the community. I would caution in taking a document like this and making it more than informational. Like, so the framework around the RSOC essentially says the IAB, you have this program, the IAB can't close the RSOC. That if we have a process document that then, creates the program separate from the IAB's will to create and destroy the program at will, which I think is possibly a good idea, just to make sure that, that can't happen, that it be time limited in some way, because otherwise we will, for this particular run of the process, create a little bit more bureaucratic technical debt, and I think that would be a bad outcome. So just one caution. I think seems pretty reasonable, but otherwise, thank you very much for this, and I look forward to participating in the program discussion.
Thank you. Leslie?
Leslie Daigle. I think Harold articulated it well in terms of making sure that we make a separation between how we achieve an articulation of what good looks like and improve our future from what is the process by which we will produce the output. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because to my earlier comment about scope, top order priority, I think, is that to address the fact that the problems that we have, the angst that we have felt about RFC series over the course of the last 18 months has often circulated around the concern of whether or not the RFC series is an IETF document publication stream only, which it historically has not been, arguably should not be going forward. So unless it has already been decided that the RFC series is an IETF publication series, period, the location for the discussions of what is necessary for the outcome should not be uniquely within the IETF, which is why a working group is not, an IETF working group is not the appropriate location for this discussion, even if the ultimate documents have to go through the IETF process for approval.
Ted?
Ted Hardy. I believe that the key question here that people have been going back and forth on is who eventually has to approve the document that will describe the new state of play. I think the result of that may actually be something we want to delay deciding until we see what the new state of play looks like. My view of the document Heather has written is that it suggests a process for coming out with an output. And if we want to say, okay, we're all happy enough with the open process under the aegis of the IAB with the trusted chairs managing the consensus, then we can decide later what process we need for the publication of its outputs. Because the publication of its outputs might in fact turn out to be from a different view of the world than the one we have now. I think that if we're willing to consider that, then we don't need to decide now whether a BCP or an IAB stream document or some other stream document is the eventual output of the group. And that since I would like us to make progress today, I'm going to suggest we consider the question of the stream of the output separately. If folks are willing to do that, I think we may end up in a situation in the future where we get multiple streams to agree. We've certainly had documents in the past, like the IANA transition documents, where more than one body indicated its assent to a document as it went through the process, and that we may be able to move forward that way. But I think I would very much like to get some agreement today on the process that we want to use moving forward while we still have this group gathered together and Heather's advice on it. And I don't want to concern ourselves extremely much, although I think there's been some valuable discussion with what the output document stream is, because I think the output of the group may have an impact.
Thank you. Wes, then Ecker.
Wes Herdeker, ISI. I like what Ted just sent, but to rephrase it in a different way, which is how I was planning on phrasing it, is it feels like we are trying to come up with the results and how things are going to flow without even gotten through the design phase of knowing what it's going to be. And it's very hard to go, I need to figure out how to get to point B, my final conclusion, and this architecture without knowing, what we actually want as a result. So in terms of trying to walk through, what process steps do we need, it feels way too early. And what we need right now is to formulate how we can have that initial design discussion and, where that should be. And I think the proposal of an open IAB work area or an IETF working group, I don't really care, because I think the process steps are actually going to occur after that. And once we know, okay, we want these outputs, and that may be changing charters to all sorts of stuff. And as an IAB member, not speaking for the rest of the IAB, I am more than happy to change the IAB charter to reflect the needs of the community, because that's what I want, right? I want the entire community to be happy with these results. And that brings me to my final point, which is that calling consensus is not nearly as important as getting the community to agree that that was the right call, right? If one group has to call for consensus and then there's going to be a fight over it, that's a huge issue, because that means that there was a disagreement. And it's much more important to get into a forum where consensus is going to happen anyway, and that the end result of the group think will be, yeah, maybe not everybody agrees, but everybody does agree that the majority of the opinion went that direction.
Thank you. Ecker?
Yeah, Eric Squirrel. Yeah, I think there have been a couple sort of process, and trying to keep my thoughts back to process issues sort of raised here. I think one is, what is the forum for discussion and trying to bring about some sort of consensus. And the second is, what is the minimum threshold of people who must have assent to these set of changes once they've come about. Working backwards from that, I agree with Ted that we'd have to knowing what the changes are, we kind of tell you who had to have assent, and you might find later that, as a concrete example, say that the proposal is that we spend $100 million a year to spin up a new publication house that stamps things on nickel tablets, then presumably we want the LLC to sign off on that, even though otherwise wouldn't have seemed like a process, like a change. I think, it's pretty clear, the ISG is going to have to sign off on this. The ISG is as almost the representative of the IETF, and whether you think this is an IETF only thing or an IETF important thing, it's clearly IETF is an enormous consumer of the service. And it's the idea that we'd make change that and the ISG would hate it, just does not seem like a functional kind of output. Maybe people feel differently about that. Someone actually disagrees with that. I'd love you to say that. In terms of process, I don't see a huge amount of difference between functionally between an IETF working group and what's suggested here. I think what's suggested here seems perfectly fine. I guess what I would say, I think in particular, the primary difference seems to me to be who appoints the chairs. I certainly would want this to be run at least somewhat like an IETF working group, and it seems like we might as well hoist the mechanisms we already have for trying to have consensus legitimacy out of the IETF process to the extent we can. I've been on a number of IEB programs, and they tend to be a tiny bit chaotic. And if we're looking for broad community consensus, we already have a set of processes that are designed to do that the IEB program is not necessarily designed to. But I don't. So it's not to say that it has to be an IETF working group in the sense that's on the data tracker in the specific place, or or that it has to have be in the general area or anything like that. But let's not spend a year reinventing all our processes for having discussions and coming to consensus unless we absolutely have to.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, Rich Sauls, Akamai, I guess. I'm also I share the concern of the previous 5 people who spoke about let's not get wrapped up in process, because I think we have a timeline that we need to consider. Working groups are not good at meeting timelines. And I think also there's an acknowledgement that this is bigger than just the IETF, therefore bigger than just the IESG. I found it really interesting that the readouts from the 3 sessions you held over the course of time, the opinion of the quality or the value of the IAB went up significantly. Right? No, never to, yeah, maybe to, yeah, we should. Yeah, let's first get some documents written. I don't care. Maybe get just a mailing list on the, on data tracker. That's fine. And then we'll venue shop appropriately.
Thank you. Colin?
Hi, Colin Perkins. I'd just like to echo some of those previous comments. The RFC series publishes documents for much more than just the IETF. So while the IETF is certainly an important body, I don't think there should be an IETF working group because it's a broader discussion. Although a working group-like process seems very reasonable.
Aaron?
Aaron Falk again. So I have a question, I guess, for you and for the room. So we're creating this new thing, but there's a bunch of existing things. We have the RFC Series Oversight Committee. We are acquiring a temporary caretaker manager something. And I'm wondering if, as part of your proposal, you have any thoughts on how those roles or individuals would engage in this effort. Automatically included, excluded, what do you think? What do others think?
I actually mentioned that in the draft, that I felt the RFC Series Oversight Committee should focus much more on the immediate operational issues while this is running, and not, while our SOC members should absolutely be, a part of whatever program comes together, that it's not their purview to run it or bless it or chair it or anything like that.
Or participate in?
No, they can participate, but I would see it as participating as individuals who happen to have experience because they're on the RSOC.
And the other role, the temporary thing?
If that person, again, wants to participate as an informed individual, I don't think there's a problem with that. Yeah.
Jump in,
Can I
Sarah.
butt in just to ask Aaron, do you have a concern with the RSOC participating as I totally agree. This is not a statement for the RSOC. I'm the note taker, Sarah. Thanks.
Sarah Banks, RSOC
Sarah, the
chair.
RSOC. I know Aaron did a good job. So I'm not speaking for the RSOC other than for myself. And I totally agree with what Heather's proposing. But because you asked the question, it makes me wonder, are you concerned if the RSOC as individuals participates in this process?
I guess if I would be uncomfortable if folks who are in an administrative or oversight role in how things have been operating were in a leadership position for this sort of reforming activity. So I don't have any problem with participating. I think that it should be open. The more informed members of the community, the better. But I think when it comes, I think that the issue of like getting agreement and calling consensus and, you know, somebody invoked the IETF process so that maybe there's appeals and, you know, I think that there's, I think that the, and I think this is kind of a principle that comes out in the proposal, that the idea is to have this be kind of a community-driven thing, and that it will feel more like a community-driven thing if folks who are sort of in the current administration and leadership aren't in the administration leadership of the effort.
So you're saying the RSOC members should not be up for consideration as chairs of whatever this is going to be?
That would be my personal opinion, yes.
Would that extend to the IAB members as well?
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that was also in the draft, that these need to be community members, not IAB, not RSOC. Martin?
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, I think a lot of this discussion has been really constructive and good, and I think it really goes to the center of the question, which is how do we build this process that has legitimacy to the extent that we can rely on the decisions that it makes, and the question of whether IAB members are chairs of this process is I think, critical. If the IAB are going to be, for instance, on the appeals chain, which is something you haven't mentioned in your document, then I can't see there being any way of putting them in both tiers of that chain. I don't think that makes any sense at all for the legitimacy of the process. We don't put area directors as chairs of working groups that they oversee themselves. And generally speaking, we don't have area directors as working group chairs, period, because of the requirement to have this sort of second level check. Which gets me to the next point. A lot of this rides on who we put in this critical consensus calling position. I assume that the responsibility for assigning those individuals will also be on the IAB as a whole. Is that what people in this room are assuming? Because I'm hearing a lot of assuming and not a lot of saying explicitly. So I just want to clear that up.
Thought I had put in the draft that the IAB would, if I didn't write it down, I was thinking it really hard, that the IAB would appoint the chairs, but they would appoint the chairs after like sending out a call for both volunteers and feedback on the individuals to the community.
I think that would be the responsible thing to do. I couldn't find it just scrolling through the document. I did find the fact that I passed IETF chairs would be a good one. You said you removed that, but it's still there.
Okay, well
so
then I pulled it in the 03 that I haven't posted yet.
Maybe there's some draft sitting around somewhere that has the text that you're thinking
It's
about.
right over there in my laptop. All right,
Okay,
thank you. Stephen.
Hi, Stephen Farrell. Well, I think any IAB member who wanted to try and chair something like this would be a total lunatic. And just one point, I thought Rich almost touched on it, but I think it would be good to give some clarity to the IAB as to when, if the IAB is picking chairs or doing something in this space or forming a program, I think it would be good to get some input as to when you would like that to happen, because I just don't want to see the IAB surprising the community. So telling us when to do stuff as well as what, so that we don't kind of think we know to do it now and other people don't think that, would be, I think, a really good thing to do.
Okay.
So again, avoiding the IAB surprising the community again is a really good thing to do.
Words to live by. Randy.
Randy Bush. I note this is not an IETF meeting because I did not see the note well.
No, it was.
Was it?
I did. I put
Oh,
it up.
sorry. I thought this was the Social Engineering Task Force.
Nope. I did it.
And I think we have a tension between it was the I-star that got us in this pickle, but we want the wisdom of some of them to get us out of this pickle. And I don't think engineers are fungible. I think that assumption is part of what got us in this pickle. And sorry for, it's a term, it's obscure English term. Fungible means exchangeable. You can just take a senior person and throw them out and issue a contract. And I think what Sue said, I don't need to repeat it.
Thank you, Randy. Mark?
Hi, Mark Nottingham. I think the general approach outlined is fine. And I'm rereading it and then reading some parts for the first time, perhaps, or at least my memory's bad. It's apparent to me just by listening between the lines, as it were, here, that there are still a lot of strongly felt feelings here. And I'm a little nervous about the proposal in that it's saying that this is a program of the IAB and it's going to run on consensus as defined, rough consensus as defined in Pete's document, which is not standards track, it's informational. And that's a process that I personally love that document, and it perhaps I love it because it puts a lot of power in chair's hands. Hi, the chair has to make a call sometimes, and the document explicitly lays out that there are cases where there are 5 people who are correct and there are 100 people who are wrong, and you go with the 5 because they're the ones who have made the technically correct argument. And I think that's again, a fantastic document. But in the dynamics of this situation, that puts a tremendous amount of power in the chair's hands. And what's making me nervous is not necessarily that, but that in combination with the fact that the appeals chain is very fuzzy. I am worried that we're going to get to a situation where this group comes to some rough consensus by that definition, and it's going to be rough. I don't think everybody's going to agree. And somebody's going to be unhappy, or a group of people are going to be unhappy, and they're going to want to take it forth. And it's not defined explicitly, but because it's an IAB program, it'll probably get taken forth to the IAB. And then past that, because it's an IAB program, it gets even fuzzier. And so that could be a recipe for a really bad situation. So I would ask you to think a little bit more carefully about explicitly laying out how that kind of situation would play out, at least so that we go into it understanding that's a risk.
What I was hoping with using a little bit of author license is my observation of the community over the last 8 years is that each group, as they try and define, what consensus is going to be, it gets squirrely. And I wanted to just cut that conversation right out and say, look, this is a reasonable way. So use this. Don't have that conversation about what is consensus in this forum. And that, in a way, that's what the role of the IAB would be, is when consensus is called by the chairs, if there's any issue with how that was done, if it wasn't done according to the guidelines as set, that's where the IAB should be stepping in and saying, wait, something broke.
And I think that's good. I think maybe just spell out a little more explicitly that the IAB is that, has that role. And if there is a role beyond that, it'd be good to say that. And if there isn't, it'd be good to say that. But let's not get into a situation where it's unclear and we're already in a crisis.
Sounds good. Martin, and then I'll try and sum up.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, I'm worried a little bit about the level of formalism we have around this specific document. So what I'm hearing here is that we're getting what, in my view at least, this room is largely coming to the conclusion that the document that the proposal that you have is sound, might need a few tweaks, but is basically sound. The process by which we formalize that agreement is a lot of what the rest of this process rests on, and it
Uh-huh.
suffers from exactly the same problems as the process that it's trying to formalize. So I'm going to put out there that this document is updated maybe one more time, maybe two more times, and we talk about it just a little bit more on the mailing list and see if we can flush out any final problems. But then it goes no further than that. This is not an RFC. This is an agreement that will not be formalized to the extent that it requires we answer the question of which stream it's published on.
Yep. I am right there with you. And actually on the RSOC agenda on Thursday, I point blank asked, the RSOC's opinion. They don't know this yet. They haven't seen the slides. Do I publish this document? Do I request it be published? I agree with you. I'm not actually sure it should be published as an RFC. I think having it written in a familiar structure as an internet draft makes all the sense in the world, but I don't see it as an RFC.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is that it's an awkward position to be in. We're going to be depending on the procedures that are written down in this document, and if we do, for instance, cite the consensus and humming RFC, then that may be part of the formal process that this follows. And if there are appeals, those appeals will have to consider that document. So it's a little bit awkward, but as long as everyone here and on the mailing list are comfortable with that, I think we can proceed.
I think it comes back to, first order of business is do the right thing. And then the second order of business is make sure that the process matches the right thing to do, if needed, if it needs to be changed.
Eric Scorla, since it's been mentioned twice, I feel compelled to mention that document has no normative force whatsoever, so it will be a concrete decision to adopt that document. It's not part of the IETF process in any way.
Yes. Yes, understood. Oops.
And I guess I should say I wouldn't be in favor of it.
So you think it must be published as an RFC? Wait, I may have misunderstood.
Sorry. What I'm saying is the on consensus and humming document, which Martin is referring to, it's not a BCP. It is not a consensus. It's not a consensus document of an IETF process, and I don't think we should adopt it as a process here.
Okay.
I just want to go on the record as saying I agree with Mark. I'm a little surprised that there was such brouhaha over RSOC and IAB and all this good stuff in the summer, and yet we're back trucking down a process that puts things back in the hands of the IAB. And so that's fine. We can totally agree to do that, but I think we should be extremely crystal clear as to exactly what that means and what that doesn't mean, so we don't get halfway down or into the home stretch. And when consensus is rough, and I totally agree with that too, everybody's not freaking out over whatever they're going to freak out about, because it was clearly painfully stated at the top of the hour.
Okay.
Ted Hardy, as I said earlier, I think the IB is totally willing to follow what the community wants to do here, including following the process you've outlined. And one simple way to do that might mean taking the meat of what you've written and the IB agreeing that the output should be the program description.
Yep.
And that means that we have the community process that led to it, informing the description of the program that the IB will then use to guide its understanding of it as it goes forward. And that's particularly important because the IB will have a large changeover this year. There are several people who are not returning, and so the result of that would be, it would be very useful to have this community process in the IB program description, so that the new IB coming in is firmly aware of what the community expects.
Sounds good.
Wes Herdeker, ISI. I'd like to propose that all meeting rooms have only one microphone, so I know where to walk to, because it keeps switching. Yep, sorry. The offhand comment doesn't need a loud echo anyway. I've been thinking about, how one of the things that keeps sort of reoccurring in this conversation is the notion of bias, and the fact that we have all of these different parties that have a very vested interest in this outcome, And the reality is that all of the people that want to contribute to the discussion likely are coming from a source of bias, regardless of whether they're on a board now, whether they used to be on a board, whether they're on a committee now. You know, everybody has a notion of where they're coming from. And the only way that you can get around a situation where almost all of the participants in a discussion have bias is to make sure that all of the bias is included as a balance point. And so one of the thoughts that I came to is we've been talking about chairs, but we haven't talked about number of chairs. And so when you look at other models like Supreme Courts in various countries, they include lots of different viewpoints with lots of different bias, so that when a decision is made, like calling for consensus or something like that, both sides get to to declare their opinion. There's some sort of vote, and then there's dissenting opinions published. And the United States now has 9 Supreme Court justices. They used to have 5 and 4 before that. I don't know what the right number is, but it sure seems to me like one way around some of this this process is to actually include a lot of different biased viewpoints, so that when a decision is made, and hopefully it would be unanimous, you'd have a much better faith in that
Right.
final decision.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. My first concern would be, of course, ending up, instead of coming together and forming compromises and whatnot, is you end up with this logjam of too many people who just won't let go. We'd have to see. All right, Mike, you're the last person.
Okay. Mike St. John's. Wes popped up something, and it's actually not the worst idea I've heard. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way. There's a model that's used for mediation sometimes, where each side picks their person, and then the 2 people agree upon a third. That may be a model for this particular thing, where we bring that down, and then the vote is on those 3 people for consensus.
Harold, it better be short because I want to sum up.
Chairs are supposed to be facilitators of finding the group consensus. Having voting chairs will be a completely new process in IETF context. I don't want to have a 5-4 vote.
Cage match at the chair table is not a good idea. I agree. Okay. This was a really, really helpful conversation, I think. And thanks everyone too for keeping it fairly on point. What I'm hearing at the end of it is, as I said before, first order of business is just everyone putting their heart into doing the right thing and figuring out some of the not trying to define the process end to end right now, because we just don't have enough information to do it. It does sound like an IAB program is still more or less the way to go. It's got some legitimate concerns, and if we document what those concerns are, we can at least say we considered this is where we are worried, and as future IABs look at the community discussion, they can say, oh well, this is something we need to be particularly sensitive to because of how the community is approaching the whole thing. I've got some work to do in the draft to be a little bit clearer about what the appeals process will be, and just in terms of, that one I think is kind of okay to define earlier rather than later, and I can certainly work on that. I will have that done possibly by the end of this week. If folks want to talk to me on the side about anything further, that's totally cool too. And I wish you all very much the best as you move forward with this program, as you participate in it, as you define what the RFC editor model may look like far into the future. Thank you for your time this morning, and enjoy the rest of your week.